In this video, we're going to hear from statistician Professor Richard Gill, an expert in mathematics and statistics who's based in the Netherlands. Now, that's important in and of itself because statistics were critical in the conviction of Lucy Letby and have since been savaged by numerous statisticians. However, what is perhaps even more important is that Professor Gill is a particularly critical figure in the wrongful conviction of nurses, as he was centrally involved in the exoneration of Lucia de Burke in the Netherlands. Lucia, sadly not with us anymore, passed away quite recently. I did mention this in a video at the time, but at least she was able to live a free life for decades, having been exonerated partly thanks to the effort of Professor Gill. So in this video, we're going to discuss with Professor Gill some of the problems with the way that statistics are used in these cases that involve nurses, including that of the conviction of neonatal nurse Lucy Letby.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you about
Yes.
Lucia de Burke.
Yeah.
So you must have been doing your normal statistical work,
Yeah.
and then one day you heard about this Dutch nurse who'd been
Yeah.
convicted. So could you tell me a little bit more about that and how you became involved?
Yeah. So I was, yeah. So of course, I was doing my normal statistical work. At the time, I was, by the way, my normal statistical work wasn't terribly normal because I was completely into quantum physics and actually statistics in quantum physics experiments. But okay. Partly because of sort of the philosophical and no, not ethical, the metaphysical questions. Does randomness really exist in nature, or is all randomness just dependence on initial conditions, which we don't know and can't control and don't control. But in other words, it's basically deterministic, and there are just things we don't know. When you toss a coin, it's going to be 50-50 heads or tails. But it's just a process of the the deterministic laws of Newton, together with a bit of air resistance and so on, is just totally deterministically determines what's going to come out, depending on how the coin was launched.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lucia de Burke, the case was going on, and we read about it in the newspaper, and we heard that she was convicted on the basis of probability calculation, which came up with a probability of 1 in 342 million, which was astounding. And that number was in all the newspapers. Now, I knew a statistician who was working for the prosecution, who advised the prosecution, who advised the court. I mean, experts are giving their expert advice to the court, but I think he'd also worked for the police. He'd been initially contacted by the police. A guy, the prosecution guy, was an old friend of mine, a colleague of mine, a fellow PhD student. I knew him to be not a brilliant mathematician, but a very decent guy, very interested in sort of the same kind of philosophical aspects of statistics as I was. And I had the impression, well, whatever, we didn't know what the data was that he'd used, nor even what exact calculation he'd done. But I had the feeling that he could be trusted to do a decent job there. But also the defense had hired actually a probabilist, not a statistician. That was a mistake because he was a very nice probabilist, but he'd never actually analyzed any data because probabilists don't do that. Lawyers don't know the difference, obviously. But and I knew him too, and he is also a decent person. And though he does believe in intelligent design and some odd things like that, but rather philosophically oriented. And his testimony to the court was that you can't compute the probability that this was by chance, that Lucia was always there when bad things happened, because there are so many different kinds of probabilities and different ways to understand the question. And which was totally the wrong thing to say to a bunch of judges, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other guy, the statistician guy, my friend the statistician, he had explained to them that he could calculate a probability and what he'd done, and this was it. And he was actually practiced in giving statistical evidence in trials. And he had a gift to know how to do it in court, which is to make, in a Dutch court, you want to impress three judges, not 12 jury members, but three judges. Basically, it's the same because the three judges don't know anything about science or probability or statistics, no more than 12 ordinary jury members. But his trick was to kind of flatter them. And you can see actually, was it Nick Johnson, the prosecuting barrister, also using all the tricks to flatter the jurors and tell them very complicated things which they probably don't understand, but make them feel kind of proud because he makes them think they can understand it. So the statistician in the Lucy Letby case was very skilled at doing that and telling difficult things in such a way that judges thought they understood it. And actually, only late, but anyway, that's what was at the first trial in 2003. The case started in 2001. Police investigation started 2001. Trial in 2003, she was found guilty on the basis of a probability calculation, 1 in 342 million. But nobody had seen the actual means of calculation or the data. And there was a lot of debate in media about this question of sending somebody to jail on the basis of only the probability that they're always there when bad things happen. Right? Now, we send people to jail on the basis of probability calculations when we send them to jail for DNA analysis, on the basis of a DNA analysis, right? So sending somebody to jail on the basis of a probability calculation which nobody understands is actually not, and only, and some circumstantial evidence is actually not, is actually business of the day in courts up and down the land and across the world. But there was a lot of controversy about doing it this way for this nurse. And I think I was interviewed on a TV program about that. But I still didn't know any of the details of the case. And anyway, Lucia appealed her conviction for so many murders and so many attempts. And the prosecution appealed too, because they had charged her with more than she got convicted for. So there was a retrial in 2004. And at that time, statistics was not used at all, quite remarkably. The judges wrote like a 120-page summary of their argumentation. And on the first page, it says, we only use incontrovertible scientific medical evidence to support our judgment, which was so many murders and so many attempted murders. And with a statistical probability calculation does not enter into the deliberations at all. So at that point, and everybody believed she'd been convicted on the basis of irrefutable medical evidence. And a year later, in 2005, the whole thing went finally up to the Supreme Court because some piece of evidence had got lost or forgotten. But the Supreme Court decided just to found it irrelevant. So in 2005, she basically had life and no further legal means. But at that point, a couple of whistleblowers started getting attention of the media. And a book was published by one of these whistleblowers, actually written by the two of them, and it analyzed the judge's argument, which was, of course, basically the prosecution argument, at length, in detail, and it showed that though there was no probability calculation anywhere in there, the fact that Lucy was always there, Lucia was always there when bad things happened, and nobody could explain it. She couldn't explain it. She didn't understand it, right? She thought she was spooked or something, right? Nobody could explain why she was always there when the bad things happened. That went, that fact was in everybody's minds. Medical experts gave their medical sort of verdict that certain events were unnatural because Lucia was there. They actually wrote that, right, in their report to the court. And these two whistleblowers had uncovered this. And so you see that the sort of statistical fact, the statistical fact of the spreadsheet basically had contaminated almost everybody's thinking, including all the medical and toxicological scientists who gave evidence which was sort of used to nail Lucia. But it was still really only the statistics, really. Almost really, almost only. Now, at that point, I got very angry. I read that book and I got angry because I felt that we statisticians had been fooled, which was indeed the case. And we statisticians sort of joined the growing campaign and were in the vanguard of the campaign, right at the front. I think that's the vanguard.
Yep.
And not just myself, but some colleagues of mine. And at some point, I organized a petition, and it was signed by all the professors of statistics in the Netherlands. and there was a cartoon in the newspaper. The petition was signed by all the statisticians in the Netherlands. That cannot be a coincidence. It's one of my favorite. I mean, I have it framed on my wall. And I organized the petition, but of course I did get my friends to sign it, and they signed it enthusiastically and willingly. And I also got a Nobel Prize winning physicist to sign the petition too. And some people believe that this was the reason why the Lucy Letby case was indeed overturned, because when the lawyers found out that they even had a Dutch Nobel Prize winning physicist telling them that they'd got it all wrong, they had to. It didn't mean that they had to they had to just put out of jail. No, they had to take the case seriously, and they seriously, I believe, put the best people onto basically the CCRC process, because we have one as well, for just the same reasons as Britain has a CCRC, following just as bad miscarriages of justice about the same time. Netherlands also has a CCRC, and these were some of the first cases. The Lucy Letby case was like one of the first three cases it handled, and so a certain committee. It was all a bit more public than in the British system, because we know who is the CCRC. The Dutch version of the CCRC is like a commission. It's a number of people, and a number of persons. We know the persons, and the way they work is that they set up a sub-commission for each case, which has been submitted to them, and that sub-commission is like a little Thirlwall inquiry, you could say. It's three persons: a policeman, a lawyer, and I think it was a medical person. I can't remember exactly. There were three persons, and I wrote a letter to them asking if I could give evidence to them, and they did. They invited me, and I explained to them what was wrong with the 1 in 342 million, which they needed to know in order to understand that the statistical evidence really was nothing at all. So I think I've answered your question now, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's
I got involved in the Lucy Letby case because I was furious,
mm,
and the same reason I'm busy in the Lucy Letby case, actually, because don't I see science being abused, and I see my science, statistical science, being grossly abused,
mm.
and really motivates me very strongly.
Yeah. So at the time when Lucia was convicted,
Yeah,
and perhaps in the immediate aftermath, and when the first
yeah,
murmurings came that she may be innocent and so
yeah.
forth, what was the atmosphere in the Netherlands at that time, and what was the kind of perspective of
It was,
the
I would say it was similar to the, no, it wasn't I mean, our tabloids are not as awful as
mm,
British tabloids. And this was, I don't know how many years earlier, 20 years earlier, or 10 years or 15 years before. So social media wasn't what it is now, right? We were starting to have social media, but I can't remember when X started and stuff like that.
this was pre-X, I think. I mean, Google only
Yeah,
came
I
out
think this was
2008, I
pretty
think.
sure this was pre-X. I mean,
Yeah,
many people were only just starting to use email and so on.
yeah.
Okay, and websites and blogs and things. So they're all pretty new. So, but there was so yeah. So what you saw was what was published in newspapers, letters to newspapers, and articles in newspapers. I mean, there was an article published in a leading Dutch quality newspaper by a lawyer, a leading, like an academic legal person who what did they say about me? Oh, they said I was a terrorist. They seriously argued I was a terrorist because I was undermining people's trust in our legal institutions. Right? I mean, you hear there are people in England who trust the legal institutions,
Mm.
lots of them, not just lawyers, but lots of ordinary people do too. I don't know what for reason, but somehow,
I think it's
well, I mean, they've been sort of brainwashed.
years of conditioning is the
Yeah,
answer.
yeah, yeah, years of conditioning and culture, and supported by the whole atmosphere of a court with all these funny clothes and like atmosphere of like being in church. It has
Mm,
got a kind of, it's sort of sacred, hallowed. It's
mm,
very, 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 very formal. Very, I mean, yeah, this is the whole power of the state being
mm,
expressed
mm.
in these things, I mean, of course, it has to, because there's the power of the state, and the state has the power to put people in jail for life. Uh, yeah, so there was a lot of opposition,
Mm.
and I once gave at some point. Sort of my side was doing so well that I was even invited to give a talk at the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences, of which I'm a member, about the case. So this is in the process towards a retrial. And there was a professor of medicine there who sort of stood up right in the beginning, and a very high distinguished professor of medicine who was so distinguished he was a member of the Academy of Sciences. So I mean, he must have done a lot of good science in his time, whatever. And he stood up and said, I should be thrown out of the academy and I should go back to England. And then he stormed angrily out. So he was a medical person, right? So the medical world was against us, and the legal world was against us. Uh, but the journalists rapidly became for us, though the quality newspaper, Dutch quality newspaper, was one of the last to start publishing pro-Lucia things. And I know part of the reason for that is that one of the top editors of the newspaper was actually a close friend of the medical consultant at the hospital where Lucia worked, who was basically the sort of Jairam and Breary rolled into one of the Lucia de Berck case. She was a pediatrician and a very high-ranking pediatrician, and she had in The Hague at the Children's Hospital in The Hague, so it's kind of very special hospital for children, not just a pediatrician in any hospital, but the chief pediatrician in the children's hospital in the Netherlands, in The Hague, and she was a close friend of the creme de la creme of Dutch society, and was interesting to find out all those connections. This was part of the reason she was protected for so long, because actually she was paranoid and actually never gave evidence in court, even though she had basically directed the police investigations. Right? And it concerned patients of her own as well as patients of her colleagues in this hospital. So this woman had wrote A4 summaries of the medical conditions of each of those children at that children's hospital, who had completely unexpectedly and inexplicably died, even though they were getting better, and so on and so forth. It's all the same story as Lucy Letby. She'd written like little guides as to what somebody had probably done, what Lucia had probably done. And but she never actually gave evidence in person, which she didn't do at the first trial, which was based on the statistics. The statistics were initially done by a friend of hers at her kitchen table. He was a computer scientist. I know him. He did a simple calculation of, sort of a balls in vases calculation. There are so many balls in a vase and so many are black, and you pick out this number, and what's the chance of getting, like, you pick out 9 balls, only 1/6 of the balls are black, but what's the chance that you get all black balls, or something like that? One of these calculations. Very boring calculations. I mean, and the probability is 1 in a million or something. This was done by a computer scientist for the doctor, who took that calculation to the head of the top CEO, the director of her hospital, who was just a manager, and convinced him to call the police. So, but as I was saying, she never actually gave evidence in person, because she was finally called to give her own testimony to the judges at the appeal in 2004. So this is still in the first stage of going up the ladder of legal procedures. She was called to give evidence, to testify, to be questioned by the judges, and she never came there. She never turned up, because that morning she had scratched her belly with a potato knife and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. And in the Netherlands, nobody is allowed to say this. But I said, most of it, well, many important people are fortunately dying off, and it should get written into the history. But Dutch journalists won't write this never wrote this in their newspapers. But that pediatrician was actually mentally ill, and she got out of appearing before the judges even, and she was protected by all her friends, but also sort of protected by society. A poor woman. I mean, you could imagine that maybe she was having a mental breakdown because there had been a serial killer in her hospital. So, I mean, it doesn't immediately say that the evidence that she gave was wrong, but it says there's something very odd here. And this action of her alerted her sister-in-law, who's a doctor, to the fact that there was more to this case than met the eye. And that sister-in-law was the first of the whistleblowers. So it was inside family information about the actual personalities of the key medical people involved in the case, which led to Lucia's exoneration. If that woman didn't have, if that doctor, I mean, if that consultant didn't have that particular doctor as her sister-in-law, Lucia would have died in jail by now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've took.
And then there are all these random things all the way through, which led to Lucia's exoneration. Lucky, first of all, a sequence of unlucky things
Hmm,
put her in jail, then a sequence of chance, lucky things got her out of jail.
yeah. So you've touched upon this already, but what are the parallels between the Lucia de case and the Lucy Letby
Yeah,
case?
they are overwhelming. They are, as soon as, I mean, I could sort of smell the parallels at the beginning from the news reports. You know, like I followed the Lucy Letby case from the moment it was first in the newspapers.
Hmm,
I read the Guardian, so I suppose at some point it was reported in the Guardian. But you know, there had been a suspicious spike in deaths at the hospital, and a nurse was helping police with their inquiries or something like that. I can't remember what the first thing was which alerted me, but it would be something like that, and it would probably be soon after the the soon after there were press releases at all, you know, and it was just the same. It was just the same as the the press releases which the police in the hospital in the Netherlands put out. But of course, once the trial was well underway, it became shockingly clear to me, appallingly clear to me, that it was completely the same, just completely the same. And you had basically, well, you had like the statistics, which immediately convinces lots and lots of people, but not people who can think.
hmm,
And the statistics are also somewhat lying because the there's you have the spreadsheet for Lucy Letby, and on the bottom line is something like in big small print saying, claiming that these are all the suspicious events which happened. But I mean, we now know they weren't even all the suspicious events. They weren't all the events which somebody had thought to be suspicious, because Dowie Evans had found even more suspicious events, and they're not in the list. And everybody interprets it as containing all the deaths. And we only found later it was only half of the deaths, or less than half.
hmm.
Anyway, so there was that point that the case is sold to the public and to the judges and to the jury by shockingly bad statistics. That became clear in the Lucia de Beek case once we actually got to see the numbers and the report of the statistician, and there were so many stupid blunders in that. And the main thing was that the definition of, well, one of the main things was, there were really three main things, but one of them was the definition of a suspicious incident was basically an incident which was maybe a bit surprising where Lucy was present, or Lucia was present, right? In the Lucia de Beek case, cases where Lucia hadn't been there at all were left out. And yet the table was supposed to show all the deaths, but it didn't show all the deaths, and so on and so forth. So that was the same. Then there's the emphasis on writings of the the suspect, the
Yeah.
accused. Lucia de Beek wrote some very odd things in her diary. and of course Lucy Letby wrote some very odd things on those post-it notes, and they are the things which grab attention, which come into the media, and which convince people. Because you walk the streets of London, you ask people what they think, and if you find people who think Lucy's guilty, they'll say, "Well, she confessed, didn't she?" Right? She confessed, didn't she? Or she was there every time. She was there every time somebody died. They'll say, or they'll say,
Yeah.
what's the third thing? Or they might say there was proof she poisoned them with insulin.
Yeah. These are the
Right.
three key aspects of evidence.
These are the three key aspects. Now you have the same three with Lucy Letby because you have you have the writings, you have the dodgy statistics, and you have what seemed to be at the time strong toxicological evidence that a child, a 6-month-old baby, had died poisoned with digoxin, heart medication. I take some digoxin every day for my dicky ticker.
Okay.
But, and if I were to eat all the pills in my bottle, I would be dead. Right, so I don't do that.
No.
Uh, uh, yeah. And of course, it wasn't just the digoxin poisoning, which was toxicologically proven, but there was also the fact that Lucia had been the last person with that baby, and that the monitors had been switched off at that same time for, well, maybe to take the baby, to do things with the baby, but of course, this was the opportunity to poison the baby. So she had like opportunity and motivation because of the diary, and because she had this strange urge to do something awful which she couldn't tell anybody about, which was obviously an urge to kill patients,
Mm.
and everybody believed that at the time. Yeah, so you have these three,
Mm.
and you have the same three in the Ben Geen case. I think you have the same three in the Colin Norris case. You have the same three in Victorino Chua. You could argue you have the same three in the Bev Allitt case.
As I said, it was very similar in Kathleen Folbig because they used her
Yeah,
diary very prominently in that court case.
yes,
So
yes. And Sally Clark.
yeah,
Apparently,
yeah,
she also wrote some odd things.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and even
Don't
her
write don't
husband,
write things down
thought
is
she
the
was guilty. So
yeah. Well, Kathleen Folbig's husband shipped her.
yeah,
Um, retained even when she was exonerated and came out of prison. I mean, he actually died last year,
mm,
but he retained his belief that she was guilty,
yes,
which kind of makes me think how hard it's going to be to make the families, the infants,
yes.
change
It
their
will
view.
it will be impossible. They will. I mean, they will go to their graves believing it.
Yeah,
That so much has been invested in it, and they've been lied to so much,
yeah.
and their lawyers have a vested interest in it being murders and not whatever else.
So some very important words and information there from Professor Richard Gill. As I say, this very important figure in the exoneration of wrongly convicted nurses. Not only did he work on the Lucia de Burke case, but he was also involved in Italy in Daniela Poggiali, and he's provided a lot of information as well on Lucy's case that is also very much appreciated, and he appears in the statistics chapter and some of the other chapters as well in my recently released book, Reasonable Doubt, Examining the Case of Lucy Letby. So I've interviewed Professor Gill 3 times for the channel, well over 3 hours, best part of 4 hours there of discussion with Richard. So please do check those out if you have time. Tomorrow I'll have more discussion with another expert on another aspect of the Lucy Letby case. I look forward to speaking with you all then.